Well, 8 years ago, Rebekah Lyons started using Instagram. For years, she became obsessed with not only sharing everyday moments, but creating them to impress her followers. Social media became the master. Rebekah became the slave.
Rebekah Lyons' life is full as a wife, mother of 4, and popular speaker and writer. Much of what she speaks and writes about is her own struggles with anxiety and stress.
In recent years, I've been on a personal journey to find sustained emotional, relational, physical, and spiritual health. I've discovered 4 simple rhythms.
In her latest book, Rhythms of Renewal, Rebekah explains the 4 ways that can help us all live life with more peace and purpose.
Please welcome to the 700 Club, Rebekah Lyons. Rebekah, great to have you here with us.
Thank you. It's a joy to be here.
Well, you once suffered from panic attacks, and then you overcame them. Then what happened when you were touring this historic, beautiful historic home in California?
Right. So about 7 years had gone by since that first panic attack, and then a healing journey began a year into that.
So you were out,
Yes.
You'd already written a book about how to overcome.
A couple.
We're speaking.
Teaching on freedom and healing, and all those things were true. God meets us in those moments. He floods us with peace. He walks us on a healing journey. But what I found that 7 years later into that is that I had a moment of relapse. And I think that happens for a lot of us. And then I had to have this conversation with God, like, was the healing real? Or because what happened is I was trapped in this bathroom stall in this old historic home. And
2x4.
Yeah, 2x4 cement walls, very thick. It was just this very rare, very unique home.
They must have been smaller people back then.
Yes, I
100
think
years
so.
ago.
Yeah, because the toilet area was set apart, and a 100-year-old wooden door with this little antique latch, and all my friends had left. We were hosting a retreat, actually, so the house was empty for the next couple hours. My phone dies. All of a sudden, the door won't open, and it's just closing in, and I have the worst panic attack of my life. It's like, and the way panic attacks work for so many of us is it's rooted out of claustrophobia or a feeling of being trapped, and we just want to run, but yet there's nowhere to go.
Right.
And so we kind of feel like if we don't escape, we're going to die. And it's not rational. It's not real, but our mind is terrified. So our body acts as if we're being held at gunpoint.
But then you looked up.
I look up, and there's this tiny little window at the top of the wall, and I had to barely reach it, hoist onto the back of the toilet, and just little antique window. I'm like, will it open? I didn't know if that latch was broken too. And I was able to slowly get out and just topple onto the rocks, the cliffs right there, looking down at the water. It was crazy.
And then once you got out, and it was later, you were, I believe, laying in bed, and you were asking God, you know, what happened?
What is this?
You know, I went 7 years without this horrible panic, and it came back. Am I a fraud? You were asking all these questions.
Yeah, shame. Shame immediately comes in. I think when relapse happens for any of us, like, have we even made any progress? Is this just now? And I think it's despair is when you believe things will never change.
But God said something to you that was so powerful in that moment. What did he say?
He said, I don't promise that fear won't come knocking, but I always promise a way of escape.
I love that. I say that again. Okay.
I don't promise that fear won't come knocking, but I always promise a way of escape. And it reminded me of a scripture I learned as a child, that I will be with you as in a way of escape so that you may be able to bear it. And I think that's what happens for so many of us when we're walking through panic or anxiety or stress, chronic. We don't feel like there's a way of escape.
Yeah.
Is God with us? Is he Emmanuel? Is he our ever-present help in every moment of trouble?
Well, we're going to get back to that. But first, I want to talk about the Instagram, being a slave to Instagram. How did that become your master?
Well, we had just moved to New York City with a child who was 4, 7, and 9. We thought it'd be great to move to New York with 3 kids, 2 toy poodles, and a minivan, which is not cool anywhere, but particularly pulling into Manhattan. And I remember Instagram was new, and it was like almost a photo gallery for all my friends back home. And in New York has so many interesting things to take photos of.
Of course.
So it was fun. Central Park, the kids playing, feeding the ducks, Times Square, you name it. And so it really was just that. It was an expression. I'm creative. I loved, lighting and lens and camera. But over time, when I started writing and teaching, I realized later on in life, about 5, 6 years into this, I was like, all of a sudden there was an expectation with social media. Like you have to bring content to this because you're a content provider. And sometimes I was like, am I sharing the things God's prompting me to share? Or am I sharing what I think people need to hear?
Just to see those likes come in.
And it just took too much of my time and attention away from even being present with my family. That was the real point of it.
Well, your beautiful new book, and I love the cover, Rhythms of Renewal, Trading Stress and Anxiety for a Life of Peace and Purpose. And Rebekah, you talk about 4 ways, or as you call them, rhythms that will help people overcome stress and anxiety and the need to constantly post on Instagram. Why is rest so important?
Rest is the foundation, I think, because God's not casual about rest. And He created the world and He created us in this rhythmic order, right? We have heartbeat, we have breathing, we have pulse, we have cadence, we have seasons and waves on the beach and day and night. And God created everything in rhythm. And when we get outside of the boundaries of rhythm, chaos ensues. And so we live in a culture now where 78% of us experience physical symptoms of stress. That's almost 4 out of 5 of us.
Wow.
And that's when it turns into anxiety. It's not just you're overscheduled. It's like you start having shortness of breath and racing mind and you can't sleep well. And so this rest is like, we need to get back to the basics of just take a nap. You know, have a morning routine.
I love naps.
Routines for deep sleep. I wanted really practical tips in the book on like, how do we rest? Take a tech detox.
And I love that you talk about the input rhythms and the output rhythms. And just like you were talking about the waves, what are the input rhythms and what are the output rhythms?
So the input rhythms are rest and restore. So rest is your inner life, your spiritual health.
Okay.
Restore is your physical life, your physical health, eating, diet, exercise. And then the last 2 rhythms are connect and create. Connect is your relational health, your family, your relationships, your vulnerability, hospitality, conflict resolution. And then create is your vocational health, just your talents and your gifts that God has put in you to offer to the world.
Rebekah, how can being creative lead to renewal? Here you are, a busy mom, 4 kids, 2 with Down syndrome, which is another book.
Yes.
And you still have time to write books and speak all over the place. You know, how can being creative lead to renewal, and how can we do that and still rest?
Right, exactly. Well, they all kind of work in a cycle, right? So after you've rested and restored, and then usually you are connected with people, then you co-collaborate and you create things. You know, none of us do anything in isolation. We always love working with teams of people who we're like-minded with. And so for me, as a kid, I was called Becca Book. I never knew that readers make writers, but God, I believe, plants, He says that His works are wonderful when He knit us in the womb, and then He calls destiny over our lives, saying, all my days were written in your book and planned before one of them began. So I didn't know when I was 4th grade reading 62 Nancy Drew books that I loved, that I would eventually write, but readers make writers. And when we do the things God actually established for us, even in these birthright gifts, it makes our heart sing. So create is very much a part of our renewal.
Well, I read a lot of books for this, you know, for my job, and I can tell you you are a good writer.
Oh, well,
and this is a great book, and everyone should get it. Rebekah's book is called Rhythms of Renewal, Trading Stress and Anxiety for a Life of Peace and Purpose, and it's available wherever books are sold. You don't want to miss this one.